So this would be a vignette type of stimulus. Mr. Miko is from Hungary. He's single and speaks broken German. He is currently working in Austria as an employee. Once he was accused of a slight bodily assault. Now that sounds a bit like the factorial design we talked about earlier with the migrant. With the difference that here you're varying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. If you have at least 2 levels per factor, you know, it's 2 by 2, it's 4 by 2, it's 8 by 2, it's 16 by 2, it's 32 groups already. So if you want to use this in a factorial design, in a full factorial design, where you look at every combination between every one of those factors, you would have a lot of groups to look at. What a vignette design now does is that it just randomly changes these conditions for every individual, every participant in the study. So on a random basis, every participant would get a different combination of these. By that, we're not making sure that we can look at every combination of every factor, like in a factorial design, because then we need the 32 groups. But it allows us to look at the effect of being from Hungary versus being from Poland, for instance, independent or taking into account other possible combinations here. So we can't look at Hungary single and German as a combination as such, but we can make sure that whether Hungary or Poland works does not depend on whether single or married or broken German or well-speaking German, because that's randomly varied across all these conditions. So it's in a way similar to the logics of a factorial design, but you don't make it a factorial design by looking at each combination separately within the groups, but you just vary these combinations. Again, there's one of those literature pieces looks at vignette studies if you're interested. So this is another one where you see in vignette studies it's called dimensions, that would be the factors in the classic experimental design: identity of the host, vignette person, functional status, social network, current housing, and then it's also called levels here, as in the factorial design. You would have a doctor or a layman, you would have Alice, Jane, Dorothea, or Louis, you would have a visiting nurse assessed to blah blah blah, and so on and so forth. Again, if you do a full factorial on this one, it's almost impossible. Using a vignette study where you randomly make those differ, quite nice, and then you usually come up with this top of results where you would have, if this were Miko again, you would have Hungary versus Poland as a factor you could look at. You would have broken German versus well-speaking German is something you could look at, and so on and so forth in single analysis. Quick example, vignette study from Switzerland. Respondents were sticking to the migration issue as you see today. Respondents are presented with profiles of immigrants and then asked to decide their application for naturalization. Switzerland is a weird country. People in the little district in Switzerland can actually vote in a sort of election referendum whether they would accept an immigrant in their constituent, in their little region or not. You know, basic democracy in Switzerland is written very high. The immigrant profiles vary on 7 attributes, including sex, country of origin, age, years since arrival in Switzerland, education, language, and integration status. And then you can come up with these types of really interesting results. And again, read also the article to get a bit more into the difference here. But you would see that in Switzerland they would be much more appreciative of immigrants from the Netherlands, from Austria, or from Italy. It's just like the Germans a bit more. As a German in Switzerland, you don't have a good sense, but they really don't like people from Turkey, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, or former Yugoslavia in general. Right? They do prefer people who would be actually born in Switzerland, but even if you're long, 29 years, that helps to be accepted. Education should be rather high to be acceptable. And German proficiency also. And you see different types of combinations of these patterns computed in different ways. Not that important in this case, but you know, you can actually look at each individual dimension in the vignette study quite concisely, and you would always know that this holds for, doesn't matter how old, whatever, because these have been randomly distributed. So again, a full factorial design, in this case 2 by 2 by 2, would look like this, and you have 8 groups. The fractional factorial design would be very close to something like a vignette study, but it's not. The literature is also quite interesting because it doesn't. Sometimes people talk about vignette study when they do full factorial designs and the other way around. Preference trials. There's a couple of experiments now by Kevin Arsenault, for instance, who has been big on this. Arsenaaux, American colleague, doing a lot of experiments in political science. What they were interested in is, you know, they said, when we do media effect studies, for instance, it's so annoying because we make people watch horror movies that never watch horror movies. Or we make people watch CNN that otherwise would always turn on Fox and never CNN. And couldn't that have an influence actually on what we're doing, on what we're finding? So they adopted this preferential trial design, which actually comes from the medical sciences originally. And what they say is, they have a pretest instrument. And in that pretest instrument, you can say whether normally the question would be something like, well, imagine it's 8 o'clock and you want to watch television, which would be a time that people would watch television. Would you prefer watching a movie or a soap opera or a casting show or whatever? Or would you prefer watching news and current affairs? And then if so, what kind of news channel maybe? So that's being measured in a pretest instrument. And then you have 2 groups. One group that would say we prefer news, there should be people there, and one group that say we prefer entertainment. Alright? The nice thing is, of those people that say I prefer news, I'd really like to watch news in that situation, some people actually randomly assigned get news. There's a random assignment here going on now. So some people get the news that they actually said they wanted to get. And some people get the entertainment that they actually wanted to get. Yeah? So you've got people that get what they want, versus some people say they want something but they get the different thing, which would be the more normal situation maybe in an experiment. That people, you know, get this. And then you can actually compare those 4 groups and see whether getting the news that you wanted to get affects your outcome very differently than getting news if you don't want it. Or getting, news if you don't want it. Kind of clear? So again, you measure the state of preference at a point before. You have the random design that then, and in that random, this looks a bit differently, but it's essentially the same. So part of this group is assigned randomly into different treatment groups here. The other part of the group, randomly, is allowed to then choose the treatment group that they'd like to get. Similar logic, right? Yeah.
So the previous slide you showed, like, you know, you give them a choice, you ask them. But then I have just a few doubts. Won't that be interfering with the internal validity? For instance, like you mentioned the example of people's reaction, measuring people's reaction when they watch horror movies. People who don't want to watch it. Let's say we have a pretest instrument and we give them whether you want to watch a romantic movie or a horror movie.
Yeah.
and you give them
What they want.
yeah, and then the random allotment to it. So then do our sample only become people who don't like watching horror movies and still getting to watch horror movies, like
No, exactly. That's the thing. That's where here the randomization comes in again. So indeed, you have a lot of people that say watch horror movies, like horror movies, but then randomly half of those people will get a horror movie, and the other half of the people will still not get the horror movie that they really like. So there's still this, and you need this other group. So you can't only go this way and this way. You still need these groups because that's essential for your experimental design. That's where you basically the groups you can compare to these other groups. That's the groups that didn't have a choice. That's the groups that didn't have a choice. So it's similar here again. So you still have a group where you use random assignment as in a classic experiment. But you also have a group to which you give a choice. And you can compare the different groups to each other and see whether having a choice in what you do actually matters for the outcome. In the interest of time, I'm skipping the results of this. I'm happy to send you the, but it's a nice little thing to do. Oh, I'm so late today, I'm very sorry. Randomized experiments, most experiments are randomized. Randomization, we know what that is. We saw all that. Randomized block design, not that important really. Sometimes we can't randomly assign people, and that's when there's nothing we can keep constant and control any other way. We're not doing an experiment, but sometimes we can actually do that, and then we're still doing an experiment, which would be called more quasi-experiment, since there's no full control about randomization. Classic example from my field. There was a newspaper strike in certain suburbs in New York City in the 1980s. 1990s, early 1990s, somewhere there. Going on for 3 weeks, I think. So certain suburbs in New York didn't get newspapers. Other suburbs still got newspapers. And now very clever colleagues said, I want to do a survey about political knowledge. And I want to see whether political knowledge about current affairs was lower, that was the hypothesis, in the suburbs that didn't get newspapers for 3 weeks versus the suburbs that got newspapers for 3 weeks. You see, you've got a control group, the group that normally gets the newspapers as always, and you've got an experimental group that for a while doesn't get newspapers. It's deprived of information. And again, this was pre-internet and whatever times. So yeah, experimental design. But no randomization. The people that get a newspaper and the people that didn't get a newspaper were not randomly assigned to these groups, but just in these groups by virtue of living in this suburb or not in this suburb. Another example, we had the luck in 2004. Theo van Gogh was a very Islam critic filmmaker in the Dutch filmmaking scene. He was stabbed by a young Muslim in Amsterdam on a given day, right? In front of his house. Very big, 2004, big turmoil, big event. We were in the field with a survey about immigrant attitudes since 8 days about already. So we were just doing a study on immigration attitudes. We had a survey in the field, and which should last 10 days, I think. We were 8 days in the field, and the murder happened. Exactly. And what we did, of course, was calling the survey company, telling them to continue for another week, which means we had responses on migration attitudes from before the murder and from after the murder, and could compare those two right away, because there was not much other change, contextual change going on. It was that this murder. Again, no random assignment really. We couldn't take a whole sample and tell which people would go to that group and which people would go to that group. But experimental control in the sense of that some people answered the questions after the event and some people before the event. So, yeah, it was actually it was published in International Journal of Public Opinion Research, I think. So it was actually, Yeah, lucky sounds a bit funny in that context, but yeah, it was a bit lucky.
Logical issues or
Sorry?
there was, if you were able to intervene on some of the methodological issues coming out of such situation.
Yeah, I mean the thing with these quasi-experiments often that you cannot plan them ahead, or it's very hard to plan them ahead. Often you need to react to certain things happening. Sometimes you can do something which colleagues of mine now did for the last Vienna local elections. They were interested in what type of information would increase turnout. Whether it would matter whether you tell people that it's a close race, for instance. Because we all assume that a close race would increase turnout because it matters, right? So what they did is that they sent out 25,000 postcards to the Vienna population, 12,500 of those to certain suburbs, containing information about the close race, the other half to other suburbs, containing none of such information. And then they compared the turnout on the constituency level. So they could look at these districts and knew which ones would have received one postcard, which ones would have received the other postcard, and could compare turnout rates into that. So that's also, it's not real random allocation of people. It's planned ahead. It's ethically a bit difficult, and we had a lot of parliamentary questions about that study at some point, which was not very nice. But some way to utilize this type of design. Yeah? And with that, I'll also leave it at the non-randomized design. Survey experiment very quickly, and we still have time for the tutorial, I think, enough time. Survey experiments, very exciting because some people say it's the best of both worlds. The best of both worlds in the sense of that we've got large, maybe representative samples of people, external validity, generalizability, and all that, great. And within you do an experiment and look at whether people react differently to certain types of stimuli. No convenience samples, no physically showing up in the lab, population-based generalizations possible, and so on and so forth. Very easy nowadays, especially with web surveys, like randomization in the web survey can be easily implemented. Also with CATI, with computer-assisted telephone service, you can program the questionnaire in a way that you have randomization. Very easy to do. So randomly selected participants, no convenience samples, are exposed to randomly assigned treatments, and you get a sense of the importance of randomization for all of this. So if you've got two types of randomization, you can imagine that that's quite useful here. Larger and more diverse samples. Again, to quote Hoffman, college sophomores might not be people. More statistical power, bigger samples usually, fresh participants, and not a college student that has taken part in 15 experiments already. Estimation of more complicated effects. Maybe more real-world exposure conditions, people filling in the survey, at least not in a lab. And you can look at subpopulations, which is not there. This study that I've been talking about yesterday briefly, I think. So we did a survey online among Muslims in the Netherlands that were registered to some panel, and we were interested in perceptions and attitudes towards integration into Dutch society, different types of, and in one version we gave them a story which was very much based on statistics. So it shows that this many % of Muslims in Holland do this and blah blah blah. Yeah? And this one was very much based on a narrative of one woman who has been living in Holland for a couple of years. It covered the same aspect, employment, issues, and others. And that's what we implemented in the survey, right? So in the survey, at the end, or in the middle somewhere, some of the respondents got this, and the others got this. They were reading it. We tried to make it look fairly realistic, I think, as a blog. forum where people would post things.